Hey, good morning, folks. Pastor Stephen back again with another No Frills daily devotional. And today's topic is follow the leader. I had this thought this weekend as I was rereading First Peter, which is the book that I've been kind of tracking through from the Bible lately. And if you've been keeping up with my videos, I spent a great deal of time talking about hope through this text. I've been talking a lot about process through this text, and I've been talking about progress through this text. And I had this question like, Peter, come on, man, why all the talk about hope? Why all the talk about process? Why all the talk about progress? And I was rereading chapter 2, verse 21. And I want to read it to you today, actually. All right. And so Peter's writing again. He's writing to these first century believers. He's writing to you and I about hope, process, and progress. And he comes to this conclusion and he says this. He says, "To this you are called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his footsteps." All right. Now, what's Peter trying to say here, right? Why is Peter, again, he's talking about hope. He's talking about process. He's talking about progress. Why all the talk about this? Because Peter knows what the life of Jesus ultimately leads to. Okay. He knows that for these first century believers and for you and I, that suffering is on the horizon. Okay. He knows that to be true. He knows that from his own experiences. He knows that what we're going to need to withstand. Okay. Maybe that's a better way of saying this. He knows what we're going to need to withstand as followers of Jesus. And hopefully sometime down the road here, I'm going to talk more about what it means to be a follower of Jesus versus what it means to just be a Christian. Okay. And so, because in first century Christianity, okay, there wasn't such a thing as the word Christian. Okay. They called themselves followers of Jesus. And there are huge implications for what that phrase or term means to be a follower of Christ. But I don't want to get down that rabbit hole today, okay? But he knows what we're going to need to withstand. He knows it. He knows that it's gonna mean withstanding insults. He knows that it's gonna mean withstanding ridicule. He knows that it's gonna mean withstanding persecution of all shapes and sizes. He knows it means for some of these folks, it's gonna mean withstanding beatings. He knows from his own experience that it's going to mean withstanding being thrown in prison, and Paul could attest to that as well. Okay, he knows that it could mean withstanding even death, okay? Which, if you know much about Peter's story, is his end. Unfortunately, he's going to die through a crucifixion, okay? And so himself, right? And so Peter, he knows that suffering is on the horizon for these believers and for you and I. And so he wants to take time investing in us and strengthening us. And he wants us ultimately to learn from his mistake. All right. And I'm going to try to explain that a little bit. Let's go back to Luke. All right. I'm going to turn back in Luke, and I'm going to be in Luke chapter 22. And I'm going to read to you verses 31 through 32, but I want to backtrack just a little bit. So Luke chapter 22 it's the Last Supper. And so Jesus is talking about his death that's coming up, and his ultimate crucifixion, his imprisonment, everything like that. And he's having his last supper with the disciples, his last meeting with them. And they kind of get into this argument again. It's happened many times throughout the Gospels where all of a sudden Jesus talks about going back to heaven. And for some reason, that always got them arguing about who's gonna be the top ranking disciple, right? Who's gonna be in charge? And God, when I come to heaven with you, right? They kept getting it mixed up with the kingdom of God, thinking that they were gonna get elevated in these leadership roles, and I'm gonna be in charge. No, I'm gonna be in charge. And it always led to this big fight. And Jesus talks to them about how that true authority is gained through serving. And I'll talk more hopefully about that later on. But it's through this that Jesus starts to have kind of a one-on-one conversation with Peter, okay? And he says this to him. This is Luke chapter 22, verses 31 through 32. He says, Simon, Simon, or that's Peter's name, Peter, Peter, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Peter, that your faith may not fail, and when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. See, Jesus has just informed Peter that a time of suffering is on the horizon for him. But not only that, he's informed Peter that he's going to screw it up. Okay, he's just informed Peter that if you know much, because if you reread or read on in Luke chapter 22, Jesus gets arrested, and Peter follows Jesus to the Sanhedrin where he gets interrogated and beaten, and people see him out in the courtyard and they start saying, "Hey, weren't you one of Jesus's disciples?" And Peter does one of these. Wait, what? Me? No. I've never seen the man before in my life, right? He is going to go into full denial mode, full betrayal mode. Jesus knows that that is on the horizon for Peter. But what's interesting is that last part of verse 32, and when you have turned back, Peter, because you're going to blow it, man. You are going to mess up. But when you turn back, buddy, okay, because I'm going to welcome you back, okay, but when you turn back, strengthen your brothers. He knows that Peter's going to blow it, but he's trying to encourage him in this process, right? And that's what Peter is trying to do for you and I, right? That's what he's trying to do all throughout this letter to the first century believers and to you and I. He's as he's talking about hope, process, and progress, he knows we're going to mess it up, because he messed it up. And he knows that suffering is on the horizon for us because suffering was on his horizon. But here's the deal, right? Here's the deal. He wants to encourage us. He wants to strengthen us because he knows something. He knows what Jesus knew. Okay, Jesus knew this. He knew that this test that Peter was going to endure, this test that Peter was going to withstand, was going to strengthen Peter so that he could strengthen others, right? And Peter knows that for you and I. He knows that the suffering that we're going to have to endure, the ridicule, the loss of friends, he knows all that stuff that we're going to experience, but he knows that that test is going to strengthen us so that we can strengthen others. And that is the beauty of the kingdom of God, is that you and I have been called to light to serve others and strengthen others. Hey, you guys, have an awesome, awesome day. Be blessed.